On 22nd of October, Rishi Sunak announced an update to the job support scheme as we all continue to be affected by the COVID-19 restrictions. It was an update on last month's winter economy plan, which included the initial unveiling of this new job support scheme. It was intended to replace the furlough scheme for 1st November, but it wasn't as generous as the original furlough scheme, with the intention that it should only be used to preserve jobs that were viable in the long term rather than to simply delay redundancies. However, at the time, a lot of people thought that it didn't go far enough and didn't actually provide enough support for employers to actually use it. I'll admit I was one of them. And with new 3 tiers restrictions leading to closure of businesses at the moment and reduced trade for many others, more cash is desperately needed to support businesses and jobs. So what's changed with the new version of the job support scheme? Well, my name is John Davis, and in this short video I'll explain. So firstly, the furlough scheme will be replaced by not one job support scheme, but 2 for the 6 months from 1st November. The 2 schemes will reflect the kind of different needs. The first one is the job support scheme closed, which is for businesses who are legally forced to close due to kind of tier 3 restrictions. The second is the job support scheme open, which is basically for any other business affected by COVID. So how do they work? We'll start with the job support scheme closed, which is the slightly simpler one. The scheme is for businesses who are legally required to close due to coronavirus restrictions, for example pubs and bars in tier 3 areas. For these businesses, the government will pay 67% of the employee's usual wages. The employer will simply pay for employers' national insurance and pension contributions. So let's say the calculation is relatively straightforward. There's been a lot of discussion about whether it's enough, and of course, particularly kind of in the news is kind of Andy Burnham and Greater Manchester's kind of battle to have that to be a larger figure. But in terms of calculations, that's the kind of simplicity. 67% of usual salary. Employer doesn't have to pay anything apart from national insurance and pension contributions. So let's move on to the job support scheme open, which is a bit more complex. Now, the idea of this scheme that it will support kind of any business affected by COVID and where employees are on reduced hours. Now, this could be a hospitality business in tier 2, where people kind of can't meet each other in venues. It could just be the 10 p.m. curfew. It could simply just be any business where there's just there's less business about at the moment, and therefore employees are not needed full time. The job support scheme will allow employees to work part-time with the government part funding the remainder. Now, to be eligible, an employee must work for at least 20% of the time, or 20% of their normal hours. For any hours that aren't worked, the cost for those unworked hours will be split. 62% will be paid by the government. 5% of the unworked hours will be paid by the employer, leaving 23% of the unworked hours just won't be paid. This effectively means the government will pay up to 49% of an employee's wages, and that's kind of the maximum funding based on an employee only working 20% of the time. The employer still pays all employer national insurance and pension contributions, the same as the other scheme, and the maximum government funding each month is £1,542 per employee. Now, if employers use this scheme, they'll still be eligible for the £1,000 job retention bonus, which is being paid for any previously furloughed workers who are still on the payroll at 1st of February 2021. So what businesses are eligible? Basically, all small and medium businesses with a payroll are eligible. They don't need to have to use furlough before. Small and medium generally is kind of less than 250 staff. Large businesses, though, will need to show an actual drop in turnover due to COVID-19. Now, the precise details haven't been announced, but basically this is to stop people claiming who don't actually need it. Which employees are eligible? Well, basically any employee who was on a payroll reported to HMRC between April 2019 and by the end of 23rd of September 2020. That being actually kind of the date before the job support scheme was announced, to stop people adding someone on after to use the scheme. This does mean, though, that an RTI submission must have been made to HMRC with that employee on by that date. So in practical terms, if you're on a monthly payroll, effectively the cut-off was 31st of August 2020. So how much will the funding be? Well, it's really just to give a couple of examples. So my first example will be with an employee working 20% of the time, which is the minimum amount to actually qualify for the scheme. To make things easy for me, I'm going to use a salary of £1,000. So let's say that employee does work 20% of the time. The first £200 will be paid by the employer, i.e. that is the pay for the hours they have worked, 20% of 1,000. For the remaining unworked hours, the employer will pay £40, which is 5% of the 800 unpaid. The government will then pay £493, which is 62% of the unpaid bit, leaving £267 actually unpaid. So if you add all that up, what it comes to is that the employer would pay £240, the government £493, and the employee receives a total of £733. Now what about if they do a few more hours, and let's use 50% of the time? I'll use the same £1,000 salary. In this instance, the first £500 is paid by the employer for the actual hours worked, and then for the remaining hours the employer will pay £25, the government will pay £308, leaving £167 unpaid. Again, to add all that up, if an employee works 50% of their time on a £1,000 salary, the employer would pay £525, the government £308, the employee would receive £833. So it is basically if you are closed, it's 67%, so it will be £670 in my example, fully funded by the government. If open and working reduced hours, the employee will make more money than if it was closed, but the split will be slightly different. So what's it mean overall? Well, I do think this revised scheme is better than the one announced last month. In that scheme, employees needed to work at least 1/3 of the time, and employers, if an employee worked 1/3 of the time, the employer had to pay 55% of the salary, because the split between government and employer was far more weighted towards the employer paying stuff. In that instance, 33% of the time, employer paid 55%, government paid 22%. Now, what that meant was I didn't actually know many business owners who intended to use the scheme, because they thought it wasn't worth it. I mean, they couldn't afford to pay 55% of salary for someone who's only in 33% of the time. They're more likely to actually simply not use the scheme and pay purely for the hours worked, or actually make people redundant. It was just too costly to keep part-time staff on. Now, the new scheme does redress that. If an employee now works 1/3 of the time, they receive 78% of the salary, but it's the employer only pays 36%. The other 42% is covered by the government. Now, this is actually far more manageable for employers to only pay a 3% top up, and therefore the scheme's a far better incentive to keep staff in jobs as long as they are obviously viable in the longer run. And the idea is that the £1,000 job retention bonus that's payable in February for staff who are still on the payroll at that time should actually to an extent cover any of that top up anyway, and also employers' national insurance and pension contributions. So the overall, this scheme is far better than the old one. I think again, people can argue over precise percentages and what have you, but I think it is a a big help for businesses, and also a big help for the workers and keeping people in jobs. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, please do get in touch. As always, if you did find this helpful, please do like the video, and of course subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thanks for watching.